Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your invitation. I'm very glad to be with you. This room is similar as our room in university, so I'm feeling like home now. I want to tell you my contribution with topic the role of a citizen in the country's accession to the European Union. In this project, I focus on the accession processes of the current EU member states. In the past, my other research, I focus on active participation in state power. Therefore, in my contribution, I focus on the role of citizens in the accession processes to the Union, with focus on the Slovak Republic. I was motivated by the current situation in the Slovak Republic, but also in the world, when it seems that citizen participation through the right of assembly is popular again. Civic participation in power is enabled by political rights, of which the right of assembly recently existed in the Slovak Republic. Through this right, citizens have the opportunity to try to assert their opinion or show their dissatisfaction. However, the real role in the exercise of power is played by the elements of direct democracy, especially the referendum. Importance of the referendum as a form of direct democracy is indisputable. Even in the 21st century, it can play an important role in pooling public opinion, as well as in the decision-making processes in the public space. It has a relatively high potential to be a supplementary institute within the framework of a functioning representative democracy. As a rule, the current member states use the referendum in connection with the issue of accession to the European Union, or originally to the European communities, in the individual enlargement states of the latter. Accession negotiations were mostly subject to holding a referendum as a confirmation of the legitimacy of a state's decision to integrate into the European structures. This is how referendums were held in the first stage of enlargement in Ireland, Norway, Denmark, Austria, Finland, Sweden, later Malta, Hungary, Lithuania, Slovakia, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Croatia, and the Czech Republic. In principle, the referendum confirmed the legitimacy of the power of the government in the accessing country, but it did not hold in absolute terms. Norway citizens rejected the country's accession to the European Union in a referendum twice, in 1972 and 1994. In the same time, it should be added that not every country used the referendum before joining the European Union, although it did use the referendum as such, for instance, Bulgaria and Romania. Finally, thanks to the United Kingdom, the European Union has an experience with a positive referendum's outcome. And recently, voices calling for a possible withdrawal from the European Union could have been heard in the world, in Slovakia too, to which the government responds with a strong position. Critical in this aspect was the claim that a mandatory or obligatory referendum was necessary for Slovakia to leave the European Union. So what is the actually like with the referendum in Slovakia in relation to European Union? The Slovak Republic pays due attention to the referendum as a form of direct democracy. This is also evidenced by the legal regulation of the national referendum in the Constitutional of the Slovak Republic in a separate section of the 5th title, which is called legislative power. However, the history of the referendum in the Slovak Republic is not very favorable to that institute. 2 referendums were related to the issue of European integration, one of which went down in history as thwarted, and the other one as the only valid. The first referendum concerned the accession of the Slovak Republic to NATO and was held in the period of the so-called matriarch's government at the time when parliament and government did not pursue the same political direction. In February 1997, the National Council of the Slovak Republic adopted a resolution with a proposal for a referendum in which citizens were to answer 3 questions about Slovakia and NATO. This resolution was addressed to the President, who is under the Constitution of the Slovak Republic entitled to call a referendum. At the same time, citizens of the Slovak Republic petitioned the President to call a referendum on direct election of the President. The President, Michal Kovač, who under the law had the right to call a referendum also on the basis of a petition, added the 4th question to the 3 questions initiated by the resolution of the National Council of the Slovak Republic, which was the subject of a citizen's petition. However, the Ministry of the Interior of the Slovak Republic supplied the municipalities with referendum ballots containing only 3 questions. After the referendum, the Central Electoral Commission decided that valid ballots with 4 questions were not delivered to citizens. Thus, the referendum was thwarted. Subsequently, the Constitutional Court of the Slovak Republic ruled of the whole matter, which concurred with the President by stating that the Constitution doesn't prohibit the 4th question from being the subject of the referendum. However, this did not change the fact that the referendum was thwarted, and from an international point of view, the fact did not contribute to difficult negotiation of the Slovak Republic on joining NATO at that time. The second referendum concerned Slovakia's accession to the European Union, and after previous experience, it was already politically hedged. The ratification process of the Treaty of Accession of the Slovak Republic to the EU, signed in Athens in 2003, began shortly thereafter. Each member and accessing country had the opportunity to decide on its own method of ratification. In Slovakia too, discussions were held on the most appropriate way to ratify the accession treaty. According to the Constitution of the Slovak Republic, in the case of referendum, a ratification referendum must be held only if the Slovak Republic enters into or leaves a state union with other states, which was not the case with the EU accession, as the EU is not a state union. The representatives of the then Slovak parliamentary parties agreed that the referendum was necessary to confirm the legitimacy of Slovakia accession to the EU. After an unanimous agreement of the resolution in the plenary of the National Council in January 2003, the President Schuster called a referendum for 16 and 17 May 2003 with the question: do you agree with the Slovak Republic becoming a member state of the European Union? Calling the referendum was a politically risky decision because its result could only be valid if an absolute majority of all eligible voters participated therein. Before 2003, there were 4 referendums, none of which turned out to be valid. Institutional factors, the need for 50% participation of eligible voters, offered opponents of the referendum question a powerful weapon to call on their own supporters to ignore the referendum that is to be inactive. Therefore, in an environment of love voter loyalty to political parties, the referendum institute is not in fact a tool for a substantive decision on the matter in question, but rather a tool for mobilizing the voters of the parties in initiating the referendum. Although the referendum held in Slovakia can be characterized by a right share of voters in favor, with insufficient participation in the referendum, these results are invalid. The referendum on accession to the European Union was in a way exceptional because it had the support of all parliamentary parties, and even this submitted question was not politically controversial, as all parties were in favor of Slovakia accession to the European Union. Thus, from the beginning of the referendum's initiation, the main problem of the day was the result of the vote itself, but rather whether participation in the referendum would reach the necessary 50% of eligible voters. As part of a broader communication strategy of the European Union, the government decided to found and co-organize an information campaign to increase public awareness of the functioning of the EU and the accession referendum. Of course, one of the goals of the information campaign was to encourage voters to participate in the referendum. The government established the so-called Ministerial Council for European Integration, which coordinated the information campaign with various committees specializing in individual aspects of the campaign. It allocated around 15 million crowns to support more than 17 small projects. According to the information strategy, the projects target those groups of voters who were expected to have the greatest degree of skepticism towards European integration, or whose participation in the referendum was the least likely. According to the strategy, there were mainly voters, residents of economically less efficient regions, ethnic minority, and people in a managerial position. In a situation where no party campaigned against joining the EU and none of the major non-governmental organizations expressed anti-integration position, the referendum campaign was dominated by criticism of opposition parties, condemning the government's information campaign, which they considered incompetent and unconvicting. The second topic discussed in the pre-referendum campaign was the question of whether the government should resign in the event of insufficient voter participation in the referendum. While a representative of the governing parties rejected consideration of this subject, there was Mer and Hazades argued that the government would not have a mandate to continue governing in the event of a referendum failure. The desire of political leaders to ensure as high participation in the referendum on the EU accession as possible was also evident in its timing. The referendum was held over 2 days, starting on Friday afternoon and continuing until Saturday evening. Although the turnout was ultimately higher than the required 50% plus one vote of eligible voters, It is clear that the final 52% was significantly lower than the government's official expected. For comparison, among the acceding countries, only Hungary had a lower participation than Slovakia. Among the valid voters cast, an overwhelming majority, 93% voted in favor of joining the European Union and only 6% voted against. According to media estimates, the necessary majority of voters was only obtained in the last hours of the voting. There is no doubt that the calls of the media, especially television stations, to participate in the referendums played an important role here, but also the widely published appeals of political leaders on the eve of the vote. Also, the legislation at the time did not allow for an active campaign in the 48 hours before polling station opened. Political party representatives agree that calls to participate in the referendum would not be considered a political campaign. Given the questionable voter turnout and it's important for the final result of the referendum, it was clear that this way poorly self-serving interpretation of the applicable legislation. In the end, the validity of the referendum was saved. Somewhat paradoxically, by the voters of those who voted against joining the European Union. Had all those who voted against joining the European Union not participate in the referendum, it would have been invalid. In any case, the generalization based on previous referendums was confirmed that the Slovak referendum results bring a high percentage of voters in favor with a relatively low voter turnout. The timing of the referendum and the link to the electoral cycle also played a role. The referendum took place only 8 months after the parliamentary election and 5 months after the municipal elections, which could have caused a certain lack of interest amongst citizens. In addition, since all parliamentary parties supported accession to the European Union, many citizens could have perceived the electoral act in which they were to cost another vote for as not so urgent and relied on the participation of others. In conclusions, it is worth noting that even in the 21st century, citizens play an important role in fundamental decision-making process. A referendum seems to be an appropriate mechanism if the interest of citizens in addressing a specific issue is sufficiently high. However, even this is not a guarantee of the expected result, as the final decision is subject to influence by a number of the above-mentioned factors interplaying in real time. When deciding whether the Slovak Republic would join the European Union or not, the referendum decided the question by a narrow margin. However, the nature of the referendum was not vital for the government of the Slovak Republic, and in the event of a negative outcome, the government would not have to take such results into account in the accession process. I believe that compared to the ruling political spectrum, the weight of the role of citizen in the decision-making process across the entire range of issues accounts for about 30%, the greater weight of decision-making remains in the hands of the governments. Thank you very much for your attention.